have some questions over the next 90 minutes. I will be on the dock after, and I'll be happy to answer them. So right now we're at a very important location. We are where the mouth of the Chicago River used to be. And if you turn around, and I apologize for the folks on the front of the boat, but if you turn around, everything you see behind us is landfill. And on this very important location, on your right-hand side of the boat, if you look straight ahead by the bridge where you see that building that says "Where Ideas Sing," right behind that building is where our first non-Native American resident put his first home in a very successful fur trading post. His name is Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. He was a man of color. His father was French descent and his mother was African descent from the island of Haiti. And he was married to a Native American woman from the Potawatomi tribe who went by the name of Catherine. And this was about 1790s. That building you see where it says "Ideas Sing" is our new Apple store. It was designed by the British firm Foster's and Partners, and they're having their big reveal on October 20th where all that paper is going to come down. Also thinking this was a very important location was the U.S. government. So over on your left-hand side of the bridge by the stairs where most of you probably came down to get here, in 1803, the U.S. government erected an Army fort, Fort Dearborn. And it was put here because this was the westernmost part of the United States and they wanted to protect it. And then our little settlement began to grow in the early 1800s. We became a city in 1837 with a population of 4,000. But we became a bit of a boom town in 1848 when we built a canal on the south branch of the Chicago River that connected the Chicago River with the Illinois rivers that fed into the Mississippi. This opened up a whole new trade route, allowing a ship to go from the Atlantic Ocean through the Great Lakes, down the Mississippi to New Orleans. Whole new trade route. So between that canal and that trade route and the railroads coming that same year, we became the center of the country. We were called the City of the Century between 1850 and 1900 because we were the fastest growing city in the world. It was like almost overnight we became the world's largest manufacturer of farm equipment. We were the world's largest lumber yard. Thank you to Wisconsin and Michigan. All of that was milled here. That lumber pretty much built the Old West. We were the world's largest grain harbor, and we were the hog and cattle butcher to the world. Union stockyards were here. In 1900, 82% of all the meat in the United States was processed right here in Chicago. So between 1850 and 1900, we grew from a little river town of 30,000 to a thriving metropolis of 1.7 million people, all in 50 years. And all that growth happened despite a really tragic event that happened here in 1871. Does anybody know what happened here in 1871? The Great Chicago Fire burnt down our whole downtown. But in some ways, as tragic as it gave us a clean slate. Architects, engineers came from all over the world, and they came here to design a new type of building, and that was a skyscraper. So let's start talking about these buildings. Over on your right-hand side, this white building with the clock tower. This is from 1921, the tower on your left. On your right from 1924. It's the Wrigley building, built for the Wrigley chewing gum. Anybody ever had Wrigley chewing gum? This was their world's headquarters. This building was designed by Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White, and they took their inspiration from history. This is based on a cathedral in Seville, Spain, La Giralda. And that white stone you see is terracotta, which means cooked earth, much like your flower pots you had at home. We learned after the Great Chicago Fire that terracotta made an excellent fireproof material, which became very important to us after the fire. But unlike stone, it weighs 10%, weighs a third less than stone, costs 10% less than stone, and it's truly an artist material because you can color it, shape it, mold it, any design you like. Now we're going to be talking about a lot of different styles of architectures on this course. I want to introduce you to a building on the right, glass and steel with fidelity at the base. This is from 1965. It's the Equitable Building designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. And this is what we built in Chicago in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. It's mid-century modernism using modern materials, namely steel and glass. Notice there's no ornamentation on this building like we see on the Wrigley building. Flat roof. The idea was less is more. There's no reference whatsoever to history on this building, which means you can see it in any city, in any country, which is why it's also referred to as the international style. Now we'll talk more about mid-century modernism later on this tour. Now the oldest structure you can see on this boat is that bridge right in front of us. This is the Michigan Avenue Bridge that renamed to the DuSable Bridge. It's from 1920, designed by Edward Bennett. Now, Edward Bennett worked with a brilliant architect and urban planner named Daniel Burnham, very famous Chicago architect. And Daniel Burnham was tired of Chicago being called meatpacker of the Midwest. He wanted us to be known as Paris on the Prairie. But he knew in order to do that, in order to be taken serious, we had to have a big major city plan, laying parks, boulevards out, a big city plan. So he and Edward Bennett did the Chicago Plan of 1909. That bridge was part of that plan. And as soon as that bridge was constructed, this whole industrial warehouse side of the river started to be more commercial. The Wrigley Building was the first one. So we're just about to take off. I want to tell you, how did we get the name Chicago? So right here at the mouth of the river, the early French explorers, they saw this stinky, smelly onion that the Native Americans would cook with. And they said, what do you call this? And they said, we call this Chicago. And the French translated as Chicago, which became the name of our city, Chicago, land of the stinking onions. Isn't that wonderful? We got this bug here. So, as we're going down the main branch, I'm going to be talking about buildings on the left, on your left-hand side. So the first building I want to talk about on your left-hand side is that beige building with the columns on the top with the big temple on the top, right on the other side of the bridge. Today this building is called London House Chicago, but when it was finished in 1923, designed by Chicago and Alfred Alschuler, it was called the London Guarantee and Accident Trust Company. This was a marine insurance company that insured the boats on this very busy harbor. So the style of this building, where you see the temple on the top and the columns, is called Beaux-Arts, which is French for beautiful or fine art. And this style of architecture was taught in Paris at l'École des Beaux-Arts. This is the architecture school early American architects went before 1860s, before we had our own architectural schools. And Beaux-Arts, they get their inspiration from ancient Greece, ancient Rome. They also like symmetry. So you could take this building and fold it, and it will match up. And the ancient Greece and ancient Rome, you can see that Greek temple on the top. That temple is called a belvedere, which translates into beautiful view. So this building is what we call adaptively reused. So this was an office building for almost 100 years, kind of ran its course as being an office building. And a year ago, they turned it into a boutique hotel, but now calling it London House. So the very top is a really cool rooftop bar, great at night to see the view. And if you've got a lot of money, you can rent that temple for a tidy sum of $1,000 an hour.
Wow.
So we're going to be going under 25 bridges on this tour. And sometimes it's going to be quiet because they get noisy. So the architecture firm who did the renovation is called Getch Partners. And so the city did not want the entrance of this hotel in this very busy corner of Michigan Avenue and Wacker. So they acquired the land just west of it. You see that glass building coming up. It used to be an old parking lot. And they put this new building in there with the glass, and that's where they put all the mechanicals, the kitchen, everything they needed for mechanicals. I love how they didn't even try to compete with the Beaux-Arts style. And then the next two buildings where you see that soaring rocket, that's from 1988. The Mather Building by Riddle and Riddle, that's a hotel. And then the next one is also a hotel. A lot of hotels going into Chicago, a lot of these old buildings are going to be adaptively reused into hotels. Because we had 54 million visitors last year, and we're on track to have more than that this year. So thank you, out of town, for spending money in our city. Okay, another Beaux-Arts building is that beige building with the 4 temples on the corner and the big temple on the top. When this opened up in 1926, it was called the Jewelers Building. It was designed by Yahweh and Dinkelberg. And for our New Yorkers on the boat, Frederick Dinkelberg designed earlier in his career the Flatiron Building in Lower Manhattan. This was 1926. Jewelers loved this building because it had a special amenity. This was the 20s, during Prohibition, a lot of crime going on. They could drive their car right into the building, take the elevator up to their floor, and safely unload their jewels. And if you know U.S. history, the 20s was kind of a silly period where there's something you could not legally do, and that was drink alcohol. But if you need the right place to go, you can get a drink. And that temple on the top was one of those places. It was a speakeasy called the Stratosphere Lounge. Now those 4 temples used to be water towers. They're no longer water towers. And people ask me, do they still use those car elevators? No, they only use one of those elevators still, and it's for cargo, not for cars. So over on your left-hand side at the river bank is our new river walk. On the part where we're passing now, this is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. This is the oldest part. It's from 2005. But the rest of it has been just from the last 2 years. Designed by Carol Ross Barney and Sasaki and Associates. So our river walk was a brainchild of our current mayor and our last mayor. See, Chicagoans, we've always embraced our lakefront, but the river, not so much. Over the last 30 years, that's changed. But the first thing we had to do to create this river walk, we had to go to Congress and get a special bill passed in order to adjust the width of the navigation channel to allow us to put these walkways under the bridges. So there's a total of 7 rooms. The rooms are defined by the bridges, each one with a different theme. The one we're passing now is the marina, so if you've got a boat later, you can pull it right up and go get a glass of wine. It's a 1.5 miles or 2.5 kilometers to go from the lake to the end of it at Lake Street. So the next 2 buildings I'm going to talk about have Chicago context. This building that looks like a mirror and with a triangle on the top. This is 77 West Wacker from 1989, designed by Catalonian architect Ricardo Bofill. And this example of this architecture, this is what we call postmodern. So after 30 years of that less is more, a lot of architects are saying, yeah, less is a bore. Let's have fun with our buildings again. So they started reintroducing kind of exaggerated historical elements. A lot say the top of this looks like the top of the Art Institute of Chicago, that Greek pediment. Bofill said architecture should be flamboyant, it should be theater. And the building next to it, that glass building that has a ribbon wrapping through it, this is a contemporary building from 2014 designed by Handel Partners. This is a luxury apartment building. And that ribbon you see is supposed to represent the Chicago River. It also has kind of a practical component. It's a balcony. And if you look at that balcony, it lines up with the front of this facade that faces the street of the limestone building next to it. And that building is the LaSalle Wacker building. It was designed by Holborn Root, finished in 1930. And the shape of that building, it looks like a chair or throne. The result of that shape of that building is a zoning ordinance that we passed here in 1923. With all these tall skyscrapers going up, people were afraid walking down the streets of Chicago was going to be a dark, airless canyon. So the city passed a new zoning ordinance. Hey, if you want to build a tall building, you have to push back the facade as you go up. You have 240 feet, but you have to push back the rest. So the architects came up with this ingenious design of like a chair or throne, which actually brings more light and air into the building. Because in 1923, we didn't have air conditioning. We had electricity, but no fluorescent lighting, and the light bulbs were like an 18-watt bulb. So this shape kind of helped with this light well take care of those issues. And the next building is called the Builders Building. And this building is built over a period of 60 years. It was called the Builders Building because in the 1920s, we saw our number of office space double, and this was a showroom for the contracting. So the part on your left where you see the columns, that's from 1927, designed by Graham Anderson, Coates and White. And on your right, that addition was put in 1986, designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And what Skidmore, Owings and Merrill did, they united the 2 buildings with this 4-story glass mansard roof. This part of the river walk is the shooting water, called the Water Theater. So we get down to the end of this, the main branch. The river is shaped like a Y. This main branch is the main stem, and then the arms go to the north branch and the south branch. You're going to see a lot of Ys in Chicago. They're on our municipal buildings. The Chicago Theater has a Y, our library. It's the shape of the Chicago River. And this next part of the river walk is the educational part where students come and learn about the fish and all the native plants. But let's talk about one that's giving an homage to all these bridges we're going under. This, where you see the flagpole and the 225 West Wacker, you look up and you see those two spires, but in between, those are supposed to be bridge houses. You see a bridge. It's much like the bridges that we're going under. But if you look down about 10 stories, you see a dish. That's supposed to be an urn. That's an homage to Frank Lloyd Wright, a Prairie School architect in Chicago. He liked to use urns in a lot of his residential design. So that's what that is. And this is from Cohn, Peterson, and Fox from 1992. And the one right next to it, also from Cohn, Peterson, and Fox, it's from 1983. And that green building is often voted Chicagoans' favorite building. This building is what we call a contextual building. This building was built for this spot in this city and nowhere else. Notice the two colors of green on this building, much like the color of our beloved river, green. And the shape, it's curved and rounded because that's what's happening on the river. We're curving at that part. But when we get under the bridge, I want you to notice the base. You see this granite. That's where they put all the mechanicals, which is unusual for skyscrapers. They're usually at the top. But if you look to the right, you see that bridge, and the very top is where the elevated trains go by. Very, very noisy. And this is before we had that glass that could be quieter. And the developer's like, we're never going to be able to rent these office buildings. So they decided to put the mechanicals on the bottom to solve that issue. So now if you look straight ahead in front of us, you see a building with arch on the top and arch on the bottom. And for our St. Louis folks, it must look an awful lot like their gateway arch they have in their city. But the architects Picard Chilton call them parabolic cuts. This building was just finished last winter. Nothing's ever been here for over 100 years, so it's pretty exciting for Chicagoans. And that platform you see with those round windows, this building sits in front or behind active railroad tracks. And that's a platform that's a rooftop that's right over the railroads. In those circles, you'll see fans in them, and that's to carry off the exhaust off the train tracks. But it's really kind of cool because it's a rooftop garden on top. There's more public space for people in the building and the citizens, and they planted the plantings of parabolic cuts. Very exciting addition to Chicago. It's called River Point. Now we are turning down to the North Branch. This all used to be heavily industrial to the 1970s, but now it's become a really cool place to live and restaurants. It's called River North. And the area on your left, this is Wolf Point, and this was all parking lot for over 100 years. This is where Frontier Chicagoans lived. Now they just put, last year they put an apartment building. They're putting another apartment building in also. So over on your left-hand side, you see a red building. This is the oldest building we're going to talk about on this tour. It's from 1898. It's called Fulton House, but when it was finished in 1898, designed by Frank Abbott, it was North American Cold Storage, one big giant freezer. And then in 1981, a man named Harry Weiss converted them to condos. So what's the first thing you do when you buy a freezer? You got to defrost it, right? It took 6 months to defrost this building. And then another year to take out all the insulation, which was matted horsehair, and then they later put cork. They filled up 500 semi-trailers. And those little stars you see on the facade, what happened when it defrosted, it started to crack. So they put these reinforced steel rods, and the stars are at the end of the rods just to reinforce it. And of course, a freezer never has balconies or windows, right? So they had to cut all those out. Those are 4 feet thick, which makes it a very quiet building to live in. So Harry Weiss, he had been on the Danube, he saw all these river cottages, and he said, why can't we have that in Chicago? Which took a lot of vision. True urban pioneer, because nobody really wanted to live on the river, because it was really stinky. So we got the land just north of it, and there's 4 river cottages he put in. They look very nautical, because Harry Weiss was a lover of sailing. So those triangles represent sails, the circles are portholes. So when they were finished in 1988, these people were true urban pioneers. There's 4 of them, there's 4 townhomes, they each have their own boat slip, balcony. It never went publicly on the market till a year and a half ago. When it did, it was listed as a fixer-upper. It only stayed on the market for 1 week, and I know if you're nosy like me, you want to know what it went for, right? $2.25 million for the fixer-upper. So the building that helped make River North become a little more hip to live is this building over on your right. This is East Bay Club, finished in 1979, designed by Ezra Gordon and Jack Levin. When this building was done, it's a health club. It had no windows on this building. This building had its back to the river because in 1979 the river wasn't an amenity. Actually, 1979 was the same year Chicago Magazine published an article, Chicago's Friendless River. And that same year, a new group was formed called Friends of the Chicago River, who've been very active about cleaning up the water quality, making the city accountable, and making it a much better place to be. Contrast that what's going on the other side of the river, these red townhomes. This is Kinsey Park from 2002, designed by Papa George Hames. I mean, these units are embracing the river. Every unit has a terrace or a balcony facing the river. And also notice our beloved Riverwalk. And I want to thank the folks on the boat from San Antonio because our Mayor Daley went down to visit your city, love your Riverwalk, mandated here as of 1998, any new construction or rehabs are required to put this Riverwalk in. So it's great for the citizens. We do like our green space. So over on your right, we see this red warehouse. This is from 1909, designed by Nibbins and Fellows for the railroad terminal warehouse. Now you see balconies on it. So I'm going to give you a lesson. If you see balconies on it, it is now residential, probably 99%, because there's no reason for a warehouse to have balconies. As you notice, there's no Riverwalk. This was converted 3 years before the mandate, so they weren't required. I have a lot of Southerners that say, well, you know, Chicago, you're kind of crazy. You put balconies. How long can you use them? What, 3 months? And the answer is 12, because we have the right coats. So we like our balconies. So straight ahead, you see all these bridges, and you see the metal, how it supports the bridge horizontally. Well, there's an architect in Chicago who took that concept and converted it to skeletal steel skyscrapers. His name was William LeBaron Jennings. During the American Civil War in the 1860s, he was the head engineer for the Union Army. And then after 20 years after the war, he took that concept of the bridge and made it into a skeletal steel skyscraper. The first steel skyscraper, it's a mouthful there, it was in Chicago in 1884. It's a home insurance building. A lot of brilliant architects went through his office as interns. Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burnham, William Holroyd, Mark Roche. A lot of famous people went through his office. Now, I want to bring your attention to the right side, this greenish blue building with the upside down V's. This is called Area on the Park from 2002, designed by French-born Lucien Lagrange. And those upside down V's are trusses that are actually structural. They help support this building, allowing for less columns on the interior. Now, this building sits on this beloved Montgomery Ward Park. Now, for Chicagoans, I always want every Chicagoan to know who Montgomery Ward is, because I think he's an unsung Chicago hero. So Montgomery Ward, everybody's heard of Amazon.com, right? Well, before Amazon, there was Montgomery Ward. So he started in the year after the fire, 1872. He's a traveling salesman. He said, you know, all these people in the rural communities are getting ripped off. They're paying a lot of money for inferior goods, and satisfaction isn't guaranteed. So he started with the one-page catalog, everything through the mail, satisfaction guaranteed. And then in 30 years, it was a 1,000-page catalog. He wasn't he was not as probably as famous as Sears, but he was the first. Now, I call him an unsung Chicago hero because he's the protector of our lakefront parks. So the area that we call Grant Park and Millennium Park. So when we were trying to raise money to build that canal that I told you about in the beginning that connected us to the Mississippi, they plotted out the land in Illinois and started selling it. But they decided the land that is now Millennium Park and Grant Park, from Michigan Avenue to the lake, is 1836 forever open and clear. No buildings. So for a period of 20 years, from 1890 to 1910, anytime he saw anybody building, he sued them, citing the 1836 forever open and clear. No buildings. And he was brutalized by the city government. They say, hey, you're stopping progress. The Chicago Tribune called him a human icicle. But if he used his own time, his own money, equivalent of $1 million of today's money, went to the Illinois Supreme Court 3 times, but he won every time, citing the 1836 Fair Open and Clear Act. So if it were not for Montgomery wards, we would not have our beautiful parkland, which is really unique to Chicago. So thank you, Montgomery Ward. I do a walking tour of the historic North Loop, and everybody asks, wait, how come this Art Institute? How did the Art Institute of Chicago get in Grant Park? Montgomery Ward did say later in his life, if he knew it was going to be that big, he would have sued them too. So we are now going through the old complex of Montgomery Ward. So over on your right, where you see this yellow Art Deco building, was the management office, finished in 1930, designed by Willis McCauley. And if you see now the hanging balconies, you know it is now residential. And I love how they cut out the bottom of the first floor to create a river walk. This was in 2005. So. And then the next building, which is the same height but looks so long, it's very big horizontal belt court on it. This was the warehouse. This was finished in 1909, designed by Richard Schmidt from Schmidt, Garden, and Martin, and who were contemporaries of Frank Lloyd Wright. This is what we call the Prairie School, where they have this it sits on the long, low prairie. This building just looks like it's going on forever. Now remember, I told you that the Montgomery Ward catalog was a 1,000-page catalog by the end. That's a lot of stuff. So the guys that worked in here, they called them pickers. They'd get the order and they'd go to each bin picking everybody's order. They actually wore roller skates. And everybody thought it was an urban legend until Gensler did the rehab on this in 2002, and they found a closet full of old roller skates. And the building that gets taller, that's all residential now. You don't see balconies because the facade is landmarked, and you can't mess with the facade when it's landmarked. But we're turning now, and that island you see in front of us is called Goose Island. How many have heard of Goose Island beer? It took its name from this island, but it's not there. It's a few blocks north. This is a man-made island. So on the right, where you see this eastern canal, our first mayor, Mayor Ogden, had a brick-making company with his brother, and they dug this out for clay, and eventually they had this big island here. It was on the maps from 1850. But if you look on the left, you see a very industrial site. You see a barge filled with stone, you see a water tower, you see a chute. This is Prairie Materials. This is where they make a lot of the concrete for these skyscrapers. But this is kind of like what the river looked like. Very industrial site in the 19th century and early 20th century. Nobody lived on the river. Oh, and no one knows why it's called Goose Island either. Lots of people say they know, but not really sure. So as we're turning, and we look at the big warehouse building with you see above the Groupon sign, you see a lady, a young girl with green, a statue, kind of pointing. This is the symbol for the Montgomery Ward. Her name is Spirit of Progress, but the guys who rode roller skates used to call her Our Lady of Perpetual Discount. So Montgomery Wards went out of business in 2001. I think they did a lot of discounting at the end. And that white building behind it, the tall building behind her where you see the white on the corners, it's called the Montgomery now, but it's the management office they built in the 1970s. Minoru Yamaguchi did the architect. And Montgomery Ward hated corner offices for for anybody in his company. He didn't even think he needed a corner office. So even though he was long dead by the 1970s, they still kind of kept with that concept. And it really worked out well because now it's condominiums, and they were saying it was so much easier to divide the space when they didn't have all those columns and working around the mechanicals because they're all in the corner. So now this building, the warehouse, is now a mixed use. Groupon has its world headquarters, Dyson's in it, a couple architecture firms. Mixed use. So over on your right-hand side where you see this red building with the Chicago Tribune sign, this is from 1981, designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. It's the Chicago Tribune Freedom Center. And the name got its name from the Employees for Freedom of the Press. So if you read a paper newspaper today, either the Chicago Tribune, the Sun-Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, 50 different suburban papers, it's most likely printed here. Everybody said, why would they use SOM to design such a short, kind of squat building? Aren't they skyscraper guys? The reason why there's 10 mega printing presses on here, and each one has 10 caissons. They're so heavy they go right down to bedrock. And in Chicago, bedrock is either 90 to 120 feet. And the idea was, you see these doors we're passing? The idea was to have the rolls of paper come in from Canada through the Great Lakes and loaded right on, because these are like a couple tons each. But what they found when they were at the side of the river, it's only 9 feet, and they would have to dredge this part of the river. But our river, the bottom is toxic, and they didn't know what they were going to release. And whoever digs up the dredge owns it, and Tribune didn't want any part of it. So they decided, we're just going to lock these doors. We'll bring them in on the other side. So this is a good time to tell you the story about the reversal of the Chicago River. And I want to apologize to St. Louis right now. So this river, I kept telling you, was very toxic. So all these rivers were lined with factories, tanneries, and anything they didn't use, they threw into the river. All of our human waste, we threw into the river. And about 6 miles down on the South Branch, we had the Union Stockyards. I do this world tour of 1893. That year that we slaughtered 10 million animals, and anything they didn't use, they threw into the river. You had a workhorse on the street, it died, they throw it into the river. So you kind of get the point. The problem was, besides it stinking and polluting the water, this water flowed to the main branch that we came down when we started the cruise and went down into Lake Michigan, which is where we got our drinking water. Even though our water crypts were 2 miles out, it was a problem. In 1885, we had this huge rainstorm. All of the toxic water was flowed out to our water crypts, polluted our drinking water. We had all these people die from waterborne illnesses, think cholera, typhoid fever. And our city leader said, this is going to be a problem. If our people keep dying, we're never going to grow. So they decided to form this new group called the Chicago Sanitary District in 1889, and they were charged with cleaning up our drinking water. Not cleaning the river water, cleaning our drinking water. So we knew how to build canals, and the Illinois rivers were a little bit lower than Lake Michigan, and they said, let's use gravity. Why don't we build a canal that connect with the Des Plaines River, which flowed into the Mississippi, and use gravity to pull the water off the river into the Illinois rivers that fed into the Mississippi. Hello, St. Louis. They weren't happy with this, and can you blame them? Who would want all of Chicago's dirty, toxic water? So they decided to build this canal that was deeper and wider to have gravity pull the water off the Chicago River. Huge, huge projects. More land was moved for that canal than was done later for the Panama Canal. In St. Louis, they kept threatening to sue us, and what did we do? We dug even faster. So on the morning of January 2nd, 1900, our sanitary district trustees got up early before the press woke up, went down to the South Branch and cut a slit in the river to start filling up the canal. It took 2 weeks to fill the canal, and on the morning of January 17th, 1900, our trustees early morning went down to Beaver Creek to release the dam. They released the dam, swoosh, hello St. Louis. These guys take a picture with their top hats. They're so proud that it's working. The water's flowing down to St. Louis. They go to lunch, and at lunch they found out that day St. Louis had filed an injunction. St. Louis took it all the way to the Supreme Court, but unfortunately for St. Louis, they lost because they couldn't prove that the water was any dirtier, as they too polluted their water in Mississippi. But St. Louis, they got even with us. They took that water, they turned it into beer, and they sold it back to us. So the water has gotten so much better in the last 30 years. In the 1970s, our water was considered toxic. Now we've been upgraded to just polluted. And say in 10 years, it'll be clean enough to swim in. In 1970s, we only had 7 species of fish in the river. Now we have 70. And let me tell you, you never would have seen kayakers, you wouldn't have seen all these waterfalls. It has gotten so much better, and every year they say it's getting cleaner and cleaner. So we're going in the right direction. So on this tour, we're going under 25 bridges. Chicago has the most movable bridges in the country. Pittsburgh has more bridges, but we have the most movable bridges. And every bridge house is different, but the engineering on the bridges are all the same. They're called trunnion bascule. Bascule is French for seesaw or teeter-totter. and then trunnion is pivot point. So at the bank of the river, there's a counterweight, and I'm going to show you one that's actually exposed, with that one that's upright coming up. Most of them are hidden, and the counterweight is lifted and up and down to move like French doors. So that's how they work. And they're so well balanced, they only need a little motor in order to work. So we're coming up to the Kinsey Street bridges. The one that's upright is the Kinsey Street Railroad Bridge. And it stays upright all the time because when it's down, it's too low for the boats to go under. And it's landmark, and they're required to put it down once a year to make sure it's still working. But when we go by there, you'll see a big yellow block, and that's the counterweight. The Kinsey Street also is the site of the Great Chicago Flood in 1992. The pilings that we're going to be passing over on the left, where you see that wood, the pilings are put to protect the bridge from the barges that go by. So one of the private contractor had put the pilings in the wrong spot, and they had pierced a long-forgotten tunnel. These tunnels were put here in the 1890s. These are tunnels that went all through downtown to bring in coal into the building and take out garbage, and they pierced these tunnels. And in the morning of April 13th, 1992, the folks that came in from downtown came into quite a flood. There were 21 feet of water at City Hall. So if you went into Marshall Fields, you could see fish swimming in the basement. Now we're passing the railroad bridge, and you can see that yellow block. That's the counterweight. Most of the other bridges are hidden. This is the only one you'll see on this that's actually exposed. Very heavy block. So we're going back to the confluence, and then we'll be floating into the south branch of the Chicago River. But over on your right-hand side, past River Point, you're going to see a building with a very narrow base and all glass straight ahead. This is 150 North Riverside, designed by Gesh Partners. Just opened up this spring. And what's happening in this building from a physics standpoint is like take a normal-sized woman in stiletto heels standing on one foot. We've got a lot of weight on a very small base. And the architect said the lot pretty much defined the building. Because on one side, on the left, you have the river. Now we're required to put a 30-foot river walk. And on the right-hand side, we're seven active railroad trains. So very small spot to erect a tall building. And a businessman will tell you the purpose of the skyscraper is to make the land pay. He's going to make a lot more money off a 54-story office building than he would a 5-story. So they needed to make it tall to make it pay. So I always say, architects design beautiful buildings, but engineers make sure they stand up. So they worked with a brilliant firm called Magnuson Clemensic, who came up with this way where you see that core, all the weight is carried onto that core, and that core goes all the way down to bedrock, which is 120 feet, and that is nailed down to bedrock. And those trusses that you see, you'll see them a little better after you go to the bridges. They go down, so the building goes down to the 8th story, and then those trusses carry the weight down to that core. And the two on the side, they say the weight it is carrying is equivalent to 26 fully loaded and fueled 747s. So it goes 150 North Riverside. One of the nice things about being a volunteer docent with Chicago Architecture Foundation, when these new buildings open up, the architects and engineers invite us and give us tours and lectures on their building. And I had a special interest to make sure this building was going to be standing up because one of my daughters works in this building. So they assured me it is safe, and I feel very good about it. It's a very beautiful building. Now you see the elevated train going by. You can see why at that base they put their mechanicals. So, very noisy. It come during rush hour. They're like every 5 minutes, very loud. So as we're going under the bridge. So one thing nice about 150 North Riverside, since the base took such a small footprint of this lot, it only takes up 25% of the whole lot. So the other 75% is almost a 2-acre park. So above the train tracks on the other side is a rooftop garden also. Now they call this the selfie. See the boat selfie on the reflective back? So I like to tell everybody about the Chicago flag. That's my little add-in because I want you all to know what it means. So you see on our police wing, you see there's a flag on the front of the boat. It's a white flag, 2 blue bars with 4 red stars. And the stars stand for 4 significant events that happened in Chicago. And you already know what 2 of them are. The first one was Fort Dearborn, our first Army fort. The second one was the Great Chicago Fire. And the other 2 are the big fairs we had here. One is the World Columbian Exposition in 1893, where we had 27 million visitors in 6 months. And the other one is for the Century of Progress in 1933-34. I always like people to know. I was on an elevator one day, and there's this big burly guy with this big Chicago flag tattoo. And I said, hey, do you know what the stars stand for? And he said, no. I said, wait, you committed to this tattoo and you don't even know what the stars stand for? He didn't know what those stars were by the time I got to the ground. So if we had the Olympics, we tried to get the Olympics, the ones that went to Rio, we didn't get it. They said if we got the Olympics, that would have been our 5th star. So over on your left-hand side, you see this very short building. Don't get used to it. It's going to be going, probably next year. Mid-century modernism from 1961 from Graham Anderson, Probst and White. The same developer from the last building, 150, is putting at least a 40-story building on this project. And the next building is the Civic Opera House. This building is from 1929, Graham Anderson, Probst and White. And notice the shape of the building from the zoning ordinance. They called this Insull's throne when it was finished. The developer was Samuel Insull, who was a utilities baron. He owned 10% of all the utilities in the United States in 1929. But as a businessman, he knew an opera house couldn't support itself, so he put 3 towers of office buildings around it to help financially support it. Timing's everything. The first opera opened up 6 days after the 1929 stock market crash. It was Aida. The opera house went bankrupt, as did Samuel Insull. But in 1954, the Lyric Opera opened up here, and it's to this day a very successful and well-respected opera house. So we're going to look over to the right-hand side and talk about mid-century modernism. These 2 buildings are twin sisters, both from Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, 1965, 1968. And this mid-century modernism came to Chicago because of 2 men. Our Mayor Richard J. Daley, who was a mayor back then in the 50s, and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, an American-German architect who moved here in the 30s. So Richard Daley, he inherited a very tired, post-war tired city. And what's the first thing you do when you shake things up? You change the zoning code. So in 1957, they changed the zoning code, say, hey, you can start building tall buildings again if you created a public plaza, public art, or both. And the other one was Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. He was the director of the Bauhaus in Berlin, Germany. Hitler didn't quite like his style, so he needed a new job. So he came to Chicago in 1937, and he was the Dean of Architecture of the school's now Illinois Institute of Technology. And this is the type of architecture he preached in Germany since the 1920s. He used modern materials, mainly steel and glass, flat roof, no ornamentation. It's about the space it embraces, not the weight it takes up. And Skidmore, Owings & Merrill took that template for their corporate architecture, and what they did is they came up with that, but sometimes you not only use steel and glass, you can use concrete. The next one is with concrete by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. This is Gateway 3. So the first one is Gateway 1, Gateway 2, this next one's Gateway 3, and this one is done with concrete and glass. So if you do all those, everything he said, you're going to get a box. It could be a tall box, it could be a short box, it could be a fat box, it could be a skinny box, or it could even be an X box. That used to be the Chicago merchandise exchange, and those X's are where, so there were no columns on the inside, so they have clear sight lines. So if this is Gateway 1, 2, and 3, I bet you know what the next one is, right? Gateway 4. So this was designed by James DeStefano when he was with Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. And he's saying in this building, everybody thinks, use mid-century modernist architects. You think you got to use black or brown glass. Well, sometimes you could use green. This glass is called bubble glass. Notice the corners, it's pinched. To me, it almost looks like this building is breathing when you look at the glass. And of course, it's not a box. This building goes with the shape of the river here. Also notice these buildings are all above active railroad tracks. So these buildings are called the gateway buildings because these railroad tracks were considered the gateway to the Chicago Loop. And this building coming up with limestone, a lot of activity going on in this building. It's very exciting for Chicagoans because it's been vacant for over 20 years. This is our old Chicago post office. Massive, massive in size because we were the mail order capital of the country. You know, this is where Montgomery Ward, Sears, Marshall Field, Spiegel, you know, besides sending out catalogs, they also had to send out their goods afterwards. This building was finished in 1921 and an addition put on in 1932, designed by Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. Now, if you look in front of us, you see that expressway. It goes right through the middle of this building. Now, the reason that it was is because Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White were the successor firm of Daniel Burnham, and they were familiar with the Chicago plan of 1909, and they knew that in that plan there was a boulevard expressway that connected downtown Chicago with the western suburbs. So there was a hole in this building for almost 25 years until the 1950s when Congress Expressway was built. Now, this is no longer useful for being a post office because it's vertical, and now it's pretty much horizontal the way mail is handled. It was sold to a negligent landlord who didn't take care of it. A new owner bought it last spring for $125 million, and when he bought it, all these broken windows and roof, there was a Olympic-sized pool of water in it. Lots of mold issues, asbestos, major hazmat, adding another year onto the construction. They're going to put $500 million into this building. They say one floor plate is like $250,000. The roof can put it's like equivalent of 5 football fields. They're hoping like a high-tech, quote, Amazon, to move in here, or some high-tech center. They could hold 12,000 tenants. So, anybody has any Amazon, the city's really working on Amazon. You can take over that spot. So 12,000 people, that's a lot of tenants. And the next building is the new post office, put in the 90s, it's very horizontal. The city did tell the U.S. government, you know, we have this mandate, we really want a river walk down our river, and the U.S. government said no. So no river walk, sorry on this side. But with 12,000 people to be in the new built post office, where are they going to live? Well, possibly over on your left-hand side where you see this dirt. This is Chicago's newest neighborhood. It's called River Line, and they're right now starting construction on 3 new towers. When it's finished, we'll have 3,600 residential units. It'll have retail, everything you need to live in a neighborhood, and they're going to restore the Riverwalk to its natural landscape with the Riverwalk. And so this neighborhood, it's a 10-year project, and it's going to wrap around this beehive-shaped building on your left. That building is called River City. It was finished in 1986, designed by Bertrand Goldberg. Now, Bertrand Goldberg, he was a student of Mies van der Rohe in Germany, and he was actually kind of persuasive Mies coming to Chicago. But he learned those, box that Mies taught, but he said, there are no right angles in nature. So you can see his building, it looks like a circle, but it's actually serpentine shape. Bertrand Goldberg was one of the folks who was really sad that after the World War II, everybody was moving out to the suburbs, nobody lived downtown. But he knew in order for someone to live downtown, you had to build a place they could live, work, and play. So the lower level has the retail, there's doctor's offices, daycare, and the upstairs are the condos and apartments. Very exciting. So I'm going to tell you the story about the Great Chicago Fire because we're going to be coming up to it soon. I'll point it out after we get closer. How many heard the story of Catherine O'Leary milking her cow Daisy, cow kicking over the lantern, starting the fire? Yep, that's the story. Well, that's a story a journalist published right after the fire. He did admit 20 years later that he made it up. We do know that the fire started in the O'Leary barn. It was Sunday evening, 9 p.m. Really, nobody really is milking their cows at 9 p.m. She was in bed sleeping. We do know it started in her barn. In background, remember I said we're the fastest growing city in the world. When you're building quickly, what do you use? You use wood. Our streets were lined with wood, our sidewalks, most of our buildings were made of wood. We had a 90-day drought and a strong southwest wind, recipe for disaster. So now over on your right-hand side, You see that radio tower in the back. If you look to the right, there's a low-slung building, and it's got like an orange front. It's really hard to see. We just kind of point out the direction. To the right of that radio tower. That's the site of the O'Leary Barn. Ironically, now it is the Chicago Fire Academy Training Center. We do know the fire started there. It started 9 o'clock on October 8th, 1871. By 11:30, it was at the river edge, and then the strong wind pushed it over to the other side. And then it went all the way until Tuesday morning until we had a light rain. It kind of ran its course. Burnt down. We had 17,000 structures. We had a population of 300,000. 300 perished. 100,000 were homeless. But we rebuilt. It was like a phoenix rising from the ashes. We rebuilt. And if you look to your left, this is the descendants of the Great Chicago Fire. This is a good photo op for those interested. You know, we didn't rebuild these tall buildings right away, because it was about 13 years when we started building taller buildings. Two things had to happen. Skeletal steel had to be invented, and elevators had to be a little safer. So after they did is when we started building these tall buildings. And after the fire, it was decided by the city government and with the help of the insurance companies, that if you're going to rebuild in the city center, you had to use fireproofing materials, which made this land very expensive to build on. And that's why we started building up. And of course, the most famous Chicago skyscraper is straight ahead, that black building with the white radio towers. I call him tall, dark, and handsome. His name is Willis Tower, spelled W-I-L-L-I-S, but is pronounced Sears. It's really hard for Chicagoans to call it Willis. But so this was the tallest building in the world when it was finished in 1974. It held that role till 1998. Now it's not even the top 10 in the world. That's how tall buildings are getting in the world now. So this was for the Sears Company. The architect was Bruce Graham from Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and he worked with the brilliant engineer Dr. Fosler Kahn. Now, Bruce Graham and Fosler Kahn had just finished the John Hancock building, which is on northern Michigan Avenue with the X's on it. And Sears said, you know, we don't want those X's on our building. You're going to have to come up with something else. So they also wanted the tallest building in the world, because Sears at the time was the largest retailer in the world. And they wanted to combine all their different divisions into one building. So the biggest enemy of a tall building is wind. So they had to account for that. So what Dr. Fosler Kahn did is he took 9 skyscrapers, like they call it the bundled tube. So he took 9 skyscrapers and bundled them together. Think of a tic-tac-toe grid with 9 buildings bundled together. You think if you have a pencil, one pencil, very easy to break. You take 9 pencils, bundle them together, much tougher to break. And then with the wind issue, what he did is he had drop-offs. He had the tubes drop off at different heights. So this building goes to 110 stories. So of the 9 tubes, 2 drop off at level 50 stories. 2 drop off at the 66th story, 3 go up to the 90th story, and only 2 go to the 110. So this helped with the wind issue. I guess when he was explaining the bundled tube and the drop off, he used a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes. So, Dr. Fosler Kahn. I want you to look over to the right where you see that limestone building with a statue on top. This is the Chicago Board of Trade building, a beautiful Art Deco building. If you like Art Deco, go into the lobby later on. It stands right at the end of LaSalle Street. So this is from 1930, designed by Hullibert and Root. And that statue was designed by a Chicago artist, John Stories. And his friend said, you know, hey John, how come you didn't put a face on Ceres, who was the Roman goddess of grain? And he said, well, you know, this is Art Deco. Faces are just suggested. And whoever is going to see a statue on the top of a 45-story office building, little they know it was going to be built later. But standing right in front of the Willis, aka Sears Tower, is that pink, I call her Pretty in Pink. So that building is 311 South Wacker, designed by Cullen, Pedersen, and Fox in 1990. And how did I do with the architecture firm? We wanted to design a tall skyscraper standing in the shadow of the most famous building in the world. I love how they went a totally different direction. You know, we're Sears is like a black tie gentleman with a very plain top. She's covered in pink Texas granite. She's got a lot of bling, beautiful headdress. She is lit up like $1,000,000 at night. This building was put so you could see her on the skyline. Those lights are actually so bright when it was first lit up and messed with the migration patterns of all the birds. So at certain times of year they have to lower the lights for the birds so they don't get messed up. But I really think that Cohen, Peterson, and Fox going a totally different direction than the Sears Tower, it kind of softens the Willis Tower. So over on your right-hand side is Enway Chicago, kind of looks like a boat. This is a mystery building in Chicago. So many Chicagoans don't know what this building is, but it's one giant slushy machine. So at night, when electric rates are low, it makes ice, and in the morning the ice water is sent down 15 miles of underground tubings to all these older historic buildings that haven't been retrofitted for air conditioning. This gives them, modern senior moment right now. Modern conveniences without the environmentally safer, and it's a lot cheaper to do that. And all that water comes back and recycled, froze again the night, and sent back the next morning. So the next building on the right is a building that no River Joseph talked about till 2014. It's a 1971 mid-century modern building. But 3 years ago, they put a map on it. That red dot you see is a "You Are Here." So you've got the Chicago River, and you see how it branches to the main branch and the left to the north branch, and that red dot is "You Are Here." Nobody talked about it till 2014 until they put the map on. Blair Kamen, who is the architect critic for the Chicago Tribune, said, "If you want to put your building on the map, put a map on your building." Now we're talking about it. So after we cross past this bridge, you can look up on the Willis Tower, and you're going to see at the 103rd story they've got 3 boxes coming out. That's called the ledge. Has anybody been on the ledges since they've been here? Wow, a lot of people. I always say there's not enough alcohol in the world to get me up there. But it's amazing, and when I did the research on this building, it's been up since 2009. They had 800 marriage proposals on these ledges. They say it's one of the most romantic places to... So those that want to take pictures, when we go between these 2 buildings, you take a picture up, you'll be able to see the ledges because they're taking a picture of you down. And these ledges are built to be able to retract in like drawers so they can clean the facade. So over on the left we have the Gateway buildings again. And remember how I said they're built over active railroad tracks? Well, all these buildings are built over what we call air rights. Air rights, some of these buildings own the air rights. Some of the earlier buildings actually lease the air rights. The next building I'm going to talk about, leases tend to be 99 years. I know the next building pay $1.3 million a year for the right, and that's the Boeing building. But these active railroad tracks are not going to stop their construction just because you want to build a building. When I went to the lecture for the 150 North Riverside, they said they can only do their work between 11 o'clock at night and 4 in the morning. These are caissons that are put between the railroad tracks down to bedrock. So the next building I'm going to talk about had an issue with these railroad tracks. So if you look at the red, on your left-hand side, that red brick building that says "Go-Go" with the clock tower, if you look to the right, you see that skeletal steel building with the trusses on the top. Well, it's 2 buildings. It's that short building with the trusses on the top, and then the taller building behind it, which has a square clock tower with the Boeing logo right below it. So this was finished in 1990, designed for Morton Salt. Now it's Boeing building. And when they got this piece of land, it was designed by Perkins and Wills, they could not put their caissons in a straight line, their columns in a straight line. Because the southwest corner of that building, that's the corner closest to off to the left, is where the railroads curved. They could not put a column down to the bedrock. So Ralph Johnson put a search out to all these engineering firms, how do we handle this? And what they did is they put these trusses on the top of that shorter building, and those trusses carry the weight over to the other side of the building. think of like a three-legged table, all the weight is carried over to the other side. I always love how they kept it exposed. They didn't try to cover up that engineering feat. So that's holds out the other side. And this building to our left in the limestone is from 1929. It is 2 North Riverside. It was originally for the Chicago Daily News newspaper. It was the first building to use air rights and have a public plaza. I know you're saying, wait, you're saying we did not embrace the river in 1929, but they put it out of necessity because they had these heavy printing presses. So in the back building, which is not over the railroad tracks, is where they had the heavy printing presses. But it created this beautiful public plaza, and now thousands of people go through this plaza every day on their way to their train. So a lot of these buildings, most of them, the new ones and the old one, have what we call LEED certification. LEED is an acronym for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And it's got 4 levels. You've got certified silver, gold, and platinum. And you get points for building close to public transportation, recycling your rainwater, using recycled materials. Chicago used to have the #1 per capita. We're not anymore, but we're still up there. We think it's the right thing to do. Got a pontoon in front of us. So back to the 150 North Riverside, you know, the ballerina on point, she kind of looks like. So, you know, if you look at the Willis Tower, that building was built to move 3 feet. It's not a rigid building. It could move 3 feet with the wind. Typically only goes about 6 inches a day. And you might be in the building, you don't think it's swaying at all, but you go into the bathroom and you see the toilet water slushing around. So at 150 North Riverside, over on our left, although structurally it is very sound, that building it's nailed into bedrock, they didn't want any sway in this building. So what they did, at the very top, there's a 190,000 gallon liquid tuned damper. It's like a big bathtub, and the water is tuned with the wind, so there's no sway in this building. And it has nothing to do with the structure. Some people get, oh, is that with the structure? No, it has nothing to do with the structure, just the sway. This building is very strong with the cord. Actually, the steel they used on this, it's the first time it was used in the United States. It's from Luxembourg. There's only 2 companies that make it currently. It's 40% stronger than typical steel. I guess there's a company in Luxembourg and China. They use the one from Luxembourg. So we're now back into the confluence of the Chicago River. And straight ahead, you're seeing the Art Deco Gem of World, the merchandise mart, finished in 1930, designed by Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. Truly Art Deco gem. You know, everything's Art Deco, which was from 1925 to 1930s, is based on soaring verticality. Actually, Art Deco is defined by the ornamentation on the building. And you see the horizontal bands, the 4 on the top with the copper bling on that, and you see the pyramids. That's when King Tut's tomb was discovered in the 1920s. A lot of Egyptian mania for Art Deco, a lot of Egyptian. So this building was for the Marshall Field's company for their for their wholesale division. Marshall Field, beloved store in Chicago, now Macy's. So Marshall Field, when he died in 1906, he left a net worth of $120 million. Now that's a lot of money today. It was even more in 1906.